Hello everyone, Dr. David Perlmutter here, and welcome to the Empowering Neurologist. I interviewed, I guess it was about 18 months ago, probably even longer, Professor Melissa Schilling, and we talked at that time about her interest in the relationship between diabetes and Alzheimer's disease, focusing on her very important contribution published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. Well, what a Renaissance individual. Dr. Schilling is a Herzog Family Professor of Management at NYU Stern School of Business, and she has just put out this new book called Quirky, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Alzheimer's or diabetes. It's actually an exploration of leaders, of innovators throughout the past couple of centuries, well, I guess 3 centuries back, if you include Benjamin Franklin. The remarkable story of the traits, foibles, and genius of breakthrough innovators who changed the world. So she looks at what are the similar characteristics of these individuals, people like Elon Musk, Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, to name a few, and we're going to talk about all of them, 8 of them, what is similar across the board and perhaps what is different, but really some very interesting characteristics that she has uncovered that really are quite interesting in terms of what perhaps made these individuals what they were, obviously along with their genius that they were gifted. Let me again tell you about Professor Schilling. She is, as mentioned, the Herzog Family Professor of Management at NYU Stern School of Business. She received her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Colorado at Boulder. She received her Doctor of Philosophy in Strategic Management from the University of Washington. Professor Schilling's research focuses on innovation and strategy in high-tech industries, including smartphones, video games, pharmaceuticals, biotech, electronic vehicles, and renewable energies. She is particularly interested in platform dynamics, network creativity, breakthrough innovations. Her textbook, Strategic Management of Technological Innovation, is now in its 5th edition. That's the #1 innovation strategy text in the world. She is also co-author of Strategic Management, an Integrated Approach, which is now in its 12th edition. Her research in innovation and strategy has earned her awards, including the NSF National Science Foundation's Career Award and the Best Paper in Management Science and Organization Science for 2007 award. Her research has also appeared in leading academic journals, including Academy of Management Journal, Academy of Management Review, Management Science, Organization Science, Strategic Management Journal, Journal of Economics and Management Strategy, Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, as mentioned, and Research Policy. So what a delight it is, again, to have the opportunity to speak with Dr. Schilling. Here we go. Professor Schilling, it's so great to see you and talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you again.
And I would say that, what a Renaissance person you are. Here we talked a year ago or so about the relationship between diabetes, insulin signaling, resistance, etc., and Alzheimer's. And now we're talking about this book and all of your accolades that I just reviewed in your introduction.
Oh.
So you are super cool. We'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
So here you write a book about these individuals, and you discover some very intriguing facts about them that you're going to talk to us about. And I think one of the overriding things is, right off the bat, is the fact that they were sort of separate. They had this separateness. They kind of were loners, if you will. And I think you delineated not so much, you kind of argued against the notion of introversion per se, but at least that they sort of existed on their own, perhaps with the exception of Benjamin Franklin. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I actually found it really surprising because I hadn't gone looking for that. In fact, I had looked for the opposite because I do a lot of research on collaboration networks and innovation. That's sort of my one of my main research areas, and I thought I would see these incredible, diverse, replete social networks around these people that would explain where their breakthrough ideas came from. And instead, was I found people who really had the opposite of that. People who were felt detached, who felt disconnected from the world, or felt like its rules didn't apply to them. They felt separate. And, in the case of Einstein, he's probably the person who talked the most about it. He talked about what an odd incongruence it was that he loved humanity, but he felt detached from people. But he also spent a lot of time thinking about how that had affected his ability to be innovative and to think. And he thought it was incredibly important to his independence, to his ability to sort of cast aside the assumptions that had held back others before him and to pursue what he believed was true, even if it wasn't necessarily going to make him popular, at least in the beginning.
And to some degree, a lot of these individuals, their family lives, social lives, I think with Marie Curie, the detachment from her daughter, I believe it was, and really that part of their lives wasn't as successful as what they accomplished from a technology perspective, let's say.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing we want to be careful to acknowledge up front is that a lot of these people got this detachment from all different places. So some of them may have been, born with a predisposition to be sort of detached. Others, in Marie Curie's case, she was plagued with chronic depression as a child because she lost her mother and her sister when she was very young. Thomas Edison had a lot of deafness, which made him feel disconnected from people. So this detachment could come from different places. And in some ways, it made them lead lives that not all of us would choose. Like Marie Curie basically gave both of her children to her father-in-law to raise. And in a biography, her daughter subsequently wrote about her shortly after Marie Curie's death. You hear all this love and adoration and respect, but you also hear longing and pining and sadness, where she says, she speaks about her mother in the third person, and she says, Marie didn't love friends and family. She loved only science.
And, just to take it even further, I believe that, you insinuate or explore the notion that perhaps, at least as it related to Einstein with his echolalia, meaning repeating things in the background, and perhaps I think Bill Gates with his, at times, incessant movement, that there were some autistic characteristics of some of these individuals and how that might relate to their social interactiveness.
Yeah, there were definitely some things that we might have thought of as being on the spectrum. And the best example is probably Nikola Tesla because he had extreme oversensitivity to stimuli. So when a fly would land on the table, to him that thud would hurt his ears. Or any lights, he kept the blinds pulled all the time and he mostly worked at night. But if a little sliver ray of sunshine would come in, he said it burned his eyes like fire. And that's actually a pretty common indicator of autism.
That's for sure.
We can't conclude that Nikola Tesla was autistic, but we can conclude pretty definitively that he had elevated dopamine because he had lots of signs of dysregulated dopamine, including mania and rushing thoughts and inability to sleep. And elevated dopamine or dysregulated dopamine is also implicated in autism.
Well, either elevated dopamine or at least elevated in ratio or relation to other neurotransmitters like serotonin. You talked about self-efficacy quite a bit, and I think that Elon Musk, his name comes to mind, and also looking at Elon Musk, how he may not have been the prom king in high school as well. But let's talk about the self-efficacy consideration.
Okay, so Elon Musk is such a great study in contrast with the separateness and the self-efficacy because people may have this impression of Elon Musk as, maybe a jet setter or someone who likes the press. And that's really quite far from the truth because if you go back to his childhood, he was extremely nerdy. He was smaller than the kids his age, and he was really, really bullied at school. And he talks about not having any friends and just escaping into reading all the time. And still to this day, it's considered a bit awkward socially. And some of his employees have referred to him as being socially detached. And yet what he has, and it's almost a superpower that, and it's the great thing is we can all cultivate it, is this incredible self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is your faith in your ability to overcome obstacles to achieve your goals. It's a task-related form of confidence. A person could maybe not come across as generally self-confident. Like, I'm not sure if you met Marie Curie that you would conclude she was confident, and yet she had extreme self-efficacy, as did all of the innovators that I studied. And so what this does is it means that nothing seems impossible to them because they believe if they just keep at it, they will overcome any obstacles. It makes them persistent. It makes them bold. When they encounter failure or they encounter criticism, they're able to disregard it because they fundamentally believe if I just persist, I can overcome this problem. And this is also a little bit part of the separateness because if you take someone like Dean Kamen or Steve Jobs, they didn't feel like the rules that applied to other people applied to them. And when other people would say, that's impossible, their thought was, not for me. It's not impossible for me. Maybe it's impossible for you, but
Yeah, I
it's not
think you did
impossible
quote
for
one of
me.
your people you reviewed who said, "It's don't tell me it's impossible. Just tell me you can't do it."
Right, right. That was Dean Kamen. Absolutely. But, Steve Jobs said a lot of those things too.
One of the overriding things that I took away from the book, and I just want you to know, I still old-fashioned. I still highlight. I love using a
I do
highlighter
too.
pen.
I draw all over my books.
And here's
And
my
I dog
highlighter.
eared
I've
them.
gone to green from yellow. But one of the real important take-home messages, and I think this was an intent of yours, is we all grew up and raised our children as well with the primary focus being on being a team player.
Right.
And that we've got to, I think, sacrifice for the team. We've got to come to a consensus in terms
Right.
of our actions. And you made it, I think, very clear that the quantum leaps, the outliers who really are moving the needle, are those that work in a more of a solitary environment. And I think that you really make it clear that we should nurture this individuality if we're really going to make progress.
Yeah, and I have to say, I work at a business school, and at business schools, at least at this time, we are all about teams and brainstorming in groups and collaboration. And so, in some ways,
Absolutely.
this is a little bit of a heretical thing to say, but the evidence, at least for breakthrough innovators, seems overwhelming to me. And they. And in part, it makes complete sense because every idea that has really changed the world initially was perceived as unreasonable, right? Strange and odd. If it wasn't unreasonable or strange and odd, we probably wouldn't have perceived it as a breakthrough. And the only way that ideas that are unreasonable get pursued is when people are unreasonable in pushing them. So that person has to be the person who doesn't make concessions, who isn't looking for the solution that everyone can easily reach consensus on. They're pursuing a solution they think will work, and they're willing to fight for it even if you don't like it. That's how unreasonable ideas come to fruition. So they kind of go hand in hand together. You have to be a little bit willing to be disagreeable in order to make something really change in the world.
I think that, as I read your book, I had in the back of my mind the notion of nature versus nurture. What are we endowed with versus what are we able to change based upon what we expose ourselves to and we are exposed to. And, we're not going to change. We're not going to be genetically Albert Einstein or Nikola Tesla. But that said, we can embrace the idea of, I think, being iconoclastic and innovative and challenging the status quo. Ronald Reagan said that status quo is a Latin term for the mess we're in. And, I've always valued the notion of not being incremental in terms of our advancements. And I think the way to not be incremental is to be that outlier, on the far side of the curve. You talked a bit in several of the people that you reviewed about the idealistic goals that they had. And certainly, I think no one personified that more than Benjamin Franklin. But to some degree, I think throughout the individuals you reviewed, there was this idealism for humanity of a goal. Perhaps I think Albert Einstein's theories not as much, but certainly powering
He was
the world.
idealistic. He was trying to find. Albert Einstein was definitely idealistic. He was looking for this universal truth that would explain the entire world.
Well, but I mean in terms of leverageable science. I mean,
Right.
his
Okay.
science was out there, and at the end, Albert Einstein, I think his message was certainly idealistic. But powering the world, Nikola Tesla, the public library, Benjamin Franklin, all
Yeah.
these ideas, I
Saving the
think,
species. Elon Musk's goal is saving the species.
yeah. So tell me, if you can, obviously you can, how pervasive was this notion of idealism and the goal of the idealistic goals throughout the group?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, so 7 out of the 8 innovators I studied were keenly idealistic. It came through loud and clear in all of their firsthand quote material. And it's interesting because this is something you can definitely cultivate in yourself. Like if you decide, if you figure out what you really believe in that you think is more important than yourself, more important than your comfort, more important than money, more important than your reputation, it becomes a powerful intrinsic motivator, and it's going to help you think bigger. It's going to help you look further out in the horizon and stay focused. And it also makes you more resilient. It gives you that thing we're now calling grit, because when you're fighting for something that's bigger than you can take a lot more punishment, and it doesn't matter if you're not being rewarded for it extrinsically, because you're being rewarded for it intrinsically. So yeah, 7 out of the 8 innovators really demonstrated this extremely clearly. Like, it's interesting because in the case of Elon Musk, not everybody realizes this. They see him as being about the money, because they are focused on things like the stock price at Tesla and stuff. And yet if you study his whole history from his childhood, you realize that money, by the age of about 28, money was no longer part of his equation at all, because he took his entire wealth, like every last dollar of it, and put part of it into Tesla, which was about getting us on renewable energy for vehicles, and the other, all of the rest, into SpaceX, which is about colonizing Mars to preserve the human species, knowing full well that both of them were likely to fail. And he says that he knew full well that these were incredibly risky ventures, and he put all his money into it, couldn't even pay his own rent. So it wasn't about the money for him. But now there's one person in the set that wasn't idealistic. And I kept looking for the idealism, because the idealism was so clear in all the others. Like Nikola Tesla was trying to create free energy to relieve humans of toil, and also wireless communication, because he believed it would eliminate war. He thought if we could talk to each other, then surely we wouldn't want to fight each other. And I think he'd be
Word
disappointed.
only true.
Were it only true. Yeah, and Dean Kamen, of course, was trying to eliminate human suffering. But Thomas Edison was not idealistic. And I kept thinking, if I dig hard enough, I'm going to find the idealism in Thomas Edison. And I dug and dug and dug, and what I actually found was the quote that proved he's not idealistic. He actually says, I'm not one of these high thinkers. I'm just staying pretty close to the ground. I'm a practical man. I'm looking for commercial solutions, and I leave that high thinking to others. And he said this in an interview to a paper in the very early 1900s. And so then I wondered what drove a person like Thomas Edison, because he worked just as hard as the others. He was in the lab at all hours. People talked about him not having the limits of ordinary men. In fact, not understanding the limits of ordinary men, because he didn't have any limits of his own. And in the end, I ended up concluding that and I think this is true of all the innovators, actually. They love to work the way a border collie loves to herd sheep. I don't know if you know anything about border collies. I come from dog people. But border collies, they'll herd anything. You don't have to train them. You don't have to reward them. You have to actually fight to keep them from hurting things, because they'll herd chickens, they'll herd children, and they love it. It feels good to them. And that's how work felt to Thomas Edison. He said, work made the earth a paradise for me, and I never intend to retire. And he was never happier than when he was grappling with a challenging problem that was firing up all the nerve cells in his brain.
Well, I think that was pretty pervasive then, this love of achievement in everybody that you reviewed. The next topic that you talked about was just the how it happened, that people were in the right place at the right time. I think you talked about, or Steve Jobs being in Silicon Valley, for example. This notion that things just happen to fall. And the other part I thought was really interesting is how unbridled Edison was working in the patent office, and how these challenging ideas came to him. And really, I think that was highly influential in terms of him looking outside the box.
You mean Einstein?
Einstein. Did I say Edison?
Einstein,
I apologize. Yeah, Einstein working in the patent office. Correct.
Yeah. So a lot of people ask how much of innovation is just being at the right time, right place. And so part of why I only studied serial breakthrough innovators, people who were widely known for having more than one breakthrough innovation, and in fact, these people are people who innovated their entire lives, was so that we can attribute at least some of their accomplishment to the person as opposed to just the time and place, right? You can disentangle time and place easier for someone who innovates over and over and over again, as opposed to the person who has, the big one hit wonder. But all of them were also influenced by opportunities of an era and the access to resources they had during that time. So for instance, Marie Curie was working at a time when Röntgen and Becquerel had just discovered mysterious rays, and so she decided to pursue mysterious rays, which is what led her to pursuing radium and polonium. And also she ends up marrying Pierre Curie, who is the man who has invented the state-of-the-art electrometer of the time, which was the only device at the time that could have measured the mysterious rays that she was studying. So there was that unique confluence of timing and resources that made a real difference. And you see this in all of them. And what that says to me is that there are lots and lots of breakthrough innovators out there who we're not seeing because they just don't happen to be at the right time and at the right place. But
well, there was this call, I think, that you sort of issued for the world, or for us to provide those,
yeah.
To bless these individuals and provide them with the human connections and the resources.
Yeah. So what was clear from all these innovators is that the resource they needed wasn't money. Like, all of these innovators started from absolutely nothing. It was quite amazing reading their stories, because it wasn't something I'd been aware of, that every single one of them started dirt broke, basically. But, because Einstein's father had lost his business because he had pursued DC electricity, which is ironic. And Marie Curie was a governess, and Elon Musk had run away from home. They all started from nothing. But the key resource they needed was people. They had to be connected to people who had the expertise or the resources to help them implement their ideas. And we can help connect people to the people they need to implement their ideas.
You read this book, and it's an interesting narrative about these individuals, but I think a lot of people read Quirky because they want some takeaway. Everybody wants to know what's in it for me, or what can I do to be helpful for myself or for the people I interact with. And one concept that you made very clear was it's important to lower the price of failure.
Yeah.
And I think, especially in education, and how we treat children, that we seem to be so focused on success, and yet we almost have to embrace failure. I mean, certainly Thomas Edison did.
Oh yeah. In fact, he thought of failure as. In fact, he didn't even perceive anything he did to be failure. So there was a nice example where he was trying to develop a new form of battery, and he had tried about 9,000 different things that hadn't worked. And a colleague came in and saw him and felt so bad for him and said, "Oh, I feel so bad. How do you stick with it when you've had 9,000 failures?" And he turns around, looks at him for a minute, and he's like, "What are you talking about? I found 9,000 ways that won't work." And to him, that was success, right? That was key to you. Figuring out what doesn't work is a huge part of figuring out what will work. Yeah. So I think this is related to self-efficacy. One of the ways you learn self-efficacy is through actually experiencing the process of overcoming obstacles to achieve your goals. And the only way that happens is if someone gives you the opportunity to fail or to succeed. So sometimes we see someone and they're initially struggling with something, and we want to jump in and we want to help them because that feels nurturing, and that's going to help with social bonding, especially with our kids. But one of the best things you can actually do is step back and say, "Hey, you got this. You're going to get it. I have faith in you. And if you don't, you'll get it the next time."
Or
right?
you may not.
Or you may not, but
and that's
just
okay.
keep at it. Yeah.
So again, there are important lessons, takeaway lessons from your book, and we've mentioned a couple of them that, we all grew up at and you especially, this notion of the importance of the team. My gosh, that's been a sort of a central theme for you, and we value the team, and that stifles progress to some degree as you learned.
Well, it certainly stifles creative ideas. Like if you want to have creative ideas in an organization, you want to come up with a creative solution. The last thing in the world you want to do is put people in a brainstorming team. There's a ton of psychology research on this. We know it creates fewer ideas, ideas of less novelty, and even ideas of less quality. Because when we are together, first of all, I've people have apprehension of judgment. They don't want to be judged negatively, so they tend not to put their wildest ideas out there. They also, you have what's called production blocking, which means while I'm talking, you're not talking. In fact, you're not even thinking the way that you would have been thinking if I wasn't talking. So in essence, I'm hijacking the way you think when I'm talking, right? It's very difficult in a team to have your own independent thought. One of the third things, which is interesting, is concessions. People avoid conflict, which means that when I say, "Oh, that idea will never work," somebody else starts shaving off the weird corners of their idea. Well, what about this? How about this? Trying to make it more palatable, or trying to make it something we can achieve consensus on. But that's a really great way to achieve a mediocre compromise. That it's not a great way to come up with a breakthrough idea.
So we need to embrace weirdness.
Yes. Yeah, definitely embracing weirdness. You want to hear a great story about weirdness? One of my favorite archetypal stories of that's like a lesson for how to tolerate weirdness.
Of course.
Okay, so when Steve Jobs applied at Atari, he was a young man, then he had just come back from India. He read that Atari was hiring. So he shows up in their lobby and he's got sandals on with dirty feet and long unwashed hair and terrible body odor because he doesn't shower. And he tells the receptionist, "Give me a job. I'm not leaving until you give me a job." And so the receptionist calls back to Al Acorn and she says, "We got a hippie kid here in the lobby who says he's not leaving till you give him a job. Do you want me to have security throw him out?" And Al Acorn says, "No, send him back," which is unusual, right? So IBM or Hewlett Packard or Procter and Gamble would have had him thrown out. So Steve Jobs goes back into the office with Al Acorn and he puts his feet up on the desk, right? Like settles back into his chair and puts his feet up on the desk, which again is just not something you would think a person could do, and probably would have got thrown out at any other company. But Al Acorn listened to him and he could hear that this was a creative and insightful person. And so he hired him. And then the trouble didn't stop there because Steve was a difficult person to work with.
So they had him work at night, I think.
Yeah, they had him only work at night. That's right. So that is a company that's really gone out of its way to turn a blind eye to things that might offend other people and make people feel like you don't belong here, you don't fit in.
This is a really, really good and important message, I think, though. And it's about embracing diversity. And,
Yeah.
For our audience, you and I have had a lot of talks about diversity in another context, as you and I have talked about the microbiome, the gut bacteria, as it relates to Lou Gehrig's disease, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And again, a very important interest of yours. I mean, so I said in the introduction, what a Renaissance individual you are to be so involved and interested, and really becoming expert in so many different areas. It's very empowering for me to know a person like you. So,
thank you. That's so
let
sweet.
me just say that for our viewers, we'll have a close, of course. This is a great book, and I'm hoping everybody buys it and reads it. And again, it's certainly a lot more than just anecdotes and the story of these individuals. There is a lot of good take-home information about not so much what we should do, I think, as individuals, but how we should perhaps nurture others and allow others to do their thing on their own and embrace the individual who comes to your office and puts his feet up on the desk. I wonder if he was wearing shoes at the time.
You mentioned that it's mostly about nurturing others, which is definitely true because there's a lot in there about managing employees or raising kids. But I think for people who do have this sense of their own quirkiness, you will find a very positive message in this book about accepting yourself.
I'm so there. I mean, I have, through the years, been considered outside the box, and I've always said that my message is not to be outside the box, it's to make the box bigger.
Yes,
so that ultimately these crazy ideas that we have, fecal transplantation for autism, you name it, that ultimately they become embraced. So that's validating and well taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope we get a chance to talk soon. I have no idea what your next venture is going to be, but I'm really looking forward to it. Can you give us any clues?
Oh, you're gonna like it, but I'm not gonna tell you what it is yet.
Okay, but I will like it.
You will like it. It'll be right up your alley.
Oh, really? All right. Well, maybe we
Yeah.
can talk offline about that. Who knows?
Okay.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
well,
very
we will
much.
talk soon. Well, that was a very interesting interview. Uh, who knew that there were so many shared traits in these individuals, and how interesting it is that we had the opportunity to explore their differences. And, all in all, what makes these individuals what they are, what they were. I think a take-home message here is that we really have to understand that some of the greatest leaps in advancement in terms of technology have happened perhaps not in the team effort, but by individuals working in isolation. We really tend to put a lot of value on team building and efforts by the team and ultimately consensus. But it looks as if, at least from this work, that a lot of advancement happens by valuing the work of the individual. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, and we will talk to you soon.